Hey there! Welcome back to another episode of CUPE. Are you hoping to learn more about unions or progressive movements? Then you're in the right spot. My name is Brianna Plummer. I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Brittany Nisbet, using she and her pronouns, reminding you that we're the only podcast of our kind, combining union info, pop culture, and more, kicking ass for the working class, one podcast at a time. Whether you're a member of CUPE, in a union, wish you were in a union, or just found us while browsing, you're definitely in the right place. To hear more episodes, look for the CUPEcast anywhere you stream or download podcasts. And for future feedback or future episode ideas, don't forget that you can email us at cupecast@cupe.on.ca. That's CUPECAST@cupe.on.ca.
On today's episode, we'll be recapping the LCBO strike and how the LCBO benefits the whole of Ontario. With the LCBO workers going on strike this summer, everyone from the government, unions, and the public had an opinion and a stance. Let's dive right in and bring you up to speed about the LCBO strike. You are listening to CUPEcast episode 39, Weathering a Dry Summer. Hi everyone, welcome back to CUPEcast. Did you miss us?
Yeah, we took July off just to enjoy the summer sunshine and family time because, breaks are so important.
That is true.
Yeah.
So for me, during the month of July, what did I do? So I attended women's school hosted by the Canadian Labour Congress.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was in Hamilton. So that was my
Uh-huh.
first CLC school.
Uh-huh.
Spent the week at McMaster's, which was great. It was great to connect with other women or gender diverse folks from different unions. So that was a very cool part. I also done a little bit of hiking in July. I got to go to like Mono Cliffs, and then in August as well, I went to Scottdale Farms. So I got to try out hiking as a new activity of mine.
That's so cool. And I loved watching like all your hiking adventures on
Mhm.
Instagram. So I was like, oh, where is she now? What is she doing now? Where is she going? I went to a cottage for a couple of days.
Oh.
We went up to a cottage in oh my god, I'm forgetting where the name of the place is anymore, but it's somewhere. It's just outside of Peterborough, and it's got the world's largest toonie, which was kind of cool. We didn't
Oh.
get out to see it though because it was raining, and I didn't want to take Benjamin out of the car and get wet. But it
Yeah,
was kind of
makes
cool to see
sense.
that. So we hung out at a cottage for a little bit and went to visit my in-laws in London. And then we also visited like a few local breweries and local wineries because living in like Niagara, I'm like right in wine country, which is
Yeah.
fantastic, which had me thinking about today's topic. So the LCBO strike.
Yes. So at the beginning of July, it was a bit dry, wasn't it?
The weather might have been rainy, but otherwise it was dry.
Yes. But it was for a very good reason. As many of our listeners know, over 9,000 LCBO workers who are members of OPSEU went on strike on July 5th. And this was their first strike ever.
That is such an amazing accomplishment. They literally made history.
OPSEU had the strike votes in the past. So LCBO members have voted for strike votes in the past in 2005, 2009, 2013, and 2017. But each time after that, they reached an agreement with the employer.
Yeah, and I don't remember or don't know what the percentages were for those. But when they did a strike vote this round, they delivered a mighty 97% in favor for strike action.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super high. Congrats to
Yeah.
them.
This is so good.
Yeah, and it's also important to note for our listeners that before 2005, these workers were represented by the Ontario Liquor Board Employees Union, and in 1998, 2000, and 2002, strike voted were also done then too. So these members are very used to taking a strike vote and what that means and how impactful a high number can be.
Oh, like absolutely. And I mean, when you're going through bargaining, it's quite I
Hmm.
mean, not all of the time, but like I'm speaking from my own experience with my own local for the past 5 rounds. things haven't gone the way that we wanted while we were bargaining. So, you file for conciliation, you take a strike vote. Like sometimes that's just how it goes. So sometimes it's part of the process. But speaking about the LCBO strike, and so while their strike is over, spoiler alert, you may all have known that strike is over. As we mentioned in our introduction, we want to recap it because what we learned from the strike, and we want to discuss the negative impacts of expanding the privatization of alcohol. So, while the strike only lasted 2 weeks, there was a lot that unraveled during that time, and it's important to recap it and go over it all.
Yeah, and while some of our listeners might be tuning into this episode and maybe wondering, their strike is over, let's move on. There's other things that we need to talk about. We think it is important to continue this conversation, especially since there's our whispers of a provincial electioning happening. It's important to keep having these conversations, particularly around how the provincial government is going to great lengths to dismantle our public system. This includes our public service jobs, services, and infrastructure. Not to mention, there are some tips and tactics from this bargaining that other locals can use and adapt for their bargaining.
Yeah, totally. I can't agree with you more. So I guess we kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit. So maybe we'll pick up where we last left off. So in our last episode, we briefly talked about the LCBO strike, or rather at that time, it was the potential for a strike. So when we recorded the last episode that was released at the end of July, the workers had been without a collective agreement since March, and they were just days away from strike action. So with a record number of members voting to support a strike, so we said the 97%, the LCBO OPSEU members plan to send a very clear message to the Ford government.
Yes, so OPSEU's Liquid Board Employees Division Bargaining Team Chair, Colleen McLeod, stated in her release back in June that the LCBO workers don't want a dry summer. We love how busy it is and being part of Ontarian celebrations, but we can't stand by while the Ford government gives away the LCBO's revenues to big box and convenient chain CEOs. It is Premiers Ford and the LCBO to make sure that public services and good jobs don't get left behind, end quote.
And OPSEU's president, JP Hornick, also added that OPSEU envisions a future where the LCBO grows with Ontario. We could improve convenience by expanding public LCBO retail locations and hours. So that would not only grow the LCBO's revenue that pay for our healthcare and education, but also create good jobs in communities across our province.
Yes, so based on these two statements made by Hornick and McLeod, there are a few things we can pick up based on their demands. So one, to keep the LCBO public. Two, to protect the $2.5 billion revenues that the LCBO generates that goes back into public services. Other stipulations of negotiations also included. Three, securing more permanent and full-time jobs with benefits. Just want to let our listeners know that it's reported that about 70% of LCBO workers were considered casual. So a more permanent and stable work will contribute to improving the overall customer service and experience at the LCBO. 4, expanding the public retail location and opening hours. And then 5, expand LCBO's warehousing, logistics, and e-commerce capacity in-house.
And these are very great demands, solid demands that would create really positive outcomes for all the employees and also Ontario. Because, anyways, so let's touch on those first 2 points about keeping the LCBO public and protecting the revenues. So as part of their marketing campaign, OPSEU released an ad about the privatization of alcohol sales and how the Ford government was funneling money to CEOs.
Yes, I remember this ad. And I remember in our last episode back in June, I said from a marketing standpoint, this was brilliant.
Oh,
I appreciated the satirical approach that OPSEU took with this video. We didn't get to play it for you last time, but if you need a refresher, here's a little clip.
Hello, pores. I'm Callum. I may be rich, but I'm drowning in profits. That's why I want a big slice of the LCBO. Sure, they invest $2.5 billion in your community. That's basically nothing to me. Just like you, I struggle to have enough yachts. Just like you. I'm sad inside my mansion. I worked really hard to be born into money. Don't I deserve more of yours? I mean, what's a billionaire got to do to get some extra zeros around here? Stop funding public services. Start funding me. No, I get it. I just don't see why we need schools and hospitals. Pick one. Who's going to both?
I loved that commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever Matthew and I saw it, we would laugh and just say, "Hello, pores," to one another. It was great. It was fabulous. And I know in the ad, the quote-unquote CEO was just an actor, but it really angered me because we know that our government is selling away our public services and more money goes into the pockets of CEOs. So OPSEU released the video following the failed negotiations around allowing grocery and corner stores to sell alcohol. And the video did a wonderful job driving the message home about how CEOs and billionaires only care about profits, not people. And overall, I think that it was well received by the public. And if you do want to check it out, we will, of course, leave the link to the video in our show notes.
Yeah, and outside OPSEU and other union groups, there's actually several mental health and health organizations that spoke against the expansion of alcohol into grocery and convenience stores.
That's so interesting. Can
Yeah.
you provide some insight?
Yeah, of course. So organizations such as CAMH spoke against the expansion and stated that it would increase alcohol-related deaths and illnesses. In a press release dated back to May of this year, CAMH stated that there are already more than 6,000 alcohol-related deaths that happen each year.
And so, in that same release, CAMH stated that the main driver of alcohol related harm is convenience. Decades of research shows that increased ease of access leads to more consumption and, in turn, more harm. So, young people, children, adults, adolescents, and young adults are among the most affected. Alcohol related harms include an increase in alcohol dependence, chronic disease, injury, violence, suicide, mental health concerns, and social issues like intimate partner violence and impaired driving. The final paragraph of the news release also states our health system is already overburdened, and hundreds of people visit an emergency department in this province solely due to alcohol every single day.
Yeah, and we know that our health system is deteriorating, and this would only make it worse. And so, Canadian Public Health Association, also known as CPHA, also condemns the Ford government for their expansion and elaborates on some of the arguments made by CAMH.
Yeah, so we won't be able to cover them all in today's episode, but quickly we'll highlight a few. So, some of the concerns flagged by CPHA include public health and safety. Enhanced access to alcohol can lead to an increased instances of impaired driving, violence, and other public safety issues. The social and economic costs associated with alcohol misuse are substantial and really well documented. The second concern that I'll flag is the economic impact on the healthcare system. So, the long term costs to the healthcare system due to alcohol related diseases and injuries are also substantial. And Ontario's healthcare resources are really already stretched, and this policy could exacerbate the burden on hospitals and medical services.
Many of these health organizations wanted the Ford government to actually reconsider the expansion and work to address the systemic harms of alcohol as opposed to increasing the convenience at the expense of the public. So you could check out these news releases published by the CPHA and CAMH in our show notes.
Yeah, and so now that we've kind of like set the stage about what OPSEU was bargaining and the opinions of other organizations, this is a good segue to discuss what happened when negotiations between the LCBO and OPSEU broke down.
Yeah, so we will start on July 5th when the OPSEU members started their first strike ever.
Yeah, so that gives me chills whenever you say first strike ever. Like I got chills. And so I think it was about 680 stores were closed and picket lines opened all over Ontario. Did you have a chance to visit any of the lines?
Actually, I did. So
Oh, good. Cool.
earlier in the episode, I did mention I attended CLC school. So
Yeah.
part of it as well, as a collective, we went out to one of the picket lines in Hamilton
That's
and
so
we
cool.
supported the group. What I want to shout out, we had a couple of members from SEIU. They led the rally and the chants, and they said it with such like conviction and so much energy. It was so great. And the LCBO members who were on the picket lines that afternoon really appreciated like the additional support and solidarity that they were getting from us. Yeah.
That's awesome. You probably really like brought in like a breath of fresh air to
Yeah.
the picket line, because sometimes it's hard, you know. I mean, I have never been on strike, but I've been to lots of picket lines and talked to lots of people who have been on strike, and it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So that must have just rejuvenated everybody.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to stop by any of the lines. But I did drive by, and I always made sure that I honked, and I always made sure that I waved, and Matthew told me that he did the same. Um and so while the workers were striking, Doug Ford was busy at his cottage making a map.
Oh my gosh. This map.
This
Like,
map.
this map has created so much criticism all over social media. Also, from like a budgeting standpoint, like
Yeah.
you know, like I work for municipal, so kind of know like the little process. If it's very
Uh-huh.
similar, like it
Uh-huh.
would have to get approved. Like the money spent on that, like also the people who had to design the map, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So that is something that he was created in the works from before OPSEU like built the like went on the picket lines. It's
Oh,
just
absolutely.
you had all this money to spend on a map. Oh, I'm just ranting now, but
I can't
there's
wait.
other
Carry
things he
on.
could. Yeah,
I love
yeah,
So, in case anyone's forgotten about the map that we're talking about, it was basically a map that showed all the open alcohol retailers in Ontario, but the general consensus online, and I should also push out that so they didn't just create this map and then drop it on a website. They created this map and then they created a commercial to go along with the map.
yes,
And the commercial was Doug Ford flipping was he flipping burgers?
yeah. At his
He's flipping-
cottage.
I can only imagine it was his cottage, but I mean, yeah. So flipping burgers at his cottage, talking about this map and how you can find all these open alcohol retailers in Ontario. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here in wine country. I'm like, are we serious?
Yeah, very
I know where
tone
there's-
deaf of like.
I know where there's lots of open ones.
Mhm.
But the tone deaf is actually exactly it, and that was actually like the general consensus online that I saw, anyways. Is like people were upset that Doug could create this map and video, and like you said, spend all of the money and all of the time while flipping burgers, but can't create a map that shows doctors who are accepting patients or hospitals that are open and their wait times. And so, in my opinion, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say in Brianna's opinion, it really seemed to backfire on him more than anything.
Yeah. And our very own OFL president, Laura Walton, has some great criticism about this map. So on X, if people don't know, X is the new name for Twitter.
People also call it Twitter, though.
I know most people don't want to call it X, rightfully so. She wrote, quote, Doug spends tax dollars on interactive maps to cross picket lines. Here are the maps I would like to see. Fully staffed ERs with minimal waits, available family doctors, healthy schools with air filtration, safe water and fully staffed, mental health supports, affordable housing, get her done. Applause.
Yes. I love that she used his own tagline against him in that. Like, get her done. Like, that was like his tagline. I loved it. It was fabulous. It was fabulous. And yeah, I think when I saw it, I reshared it and I was like, tell me that you are trying to union bust without telling me you're trying to union bust.
Yeah.
Ford will go first. So we spoke about Colleen McLeod at the beginning of this, and she actually quoted the LCBO workers fully support the mom and pop stores and craft brewers, wineries, and distilleries, and we also encourage folks to go to them. But that's not what Ford is doing. He is undermining LCBO workers and this strike to hand the alcohol market over to the big box store, grocery, and convenience chain CEOs so the alcohol sales can be monopolized by them.
Colleen then continues to say, quote, in fact, mom and pop stores and small producers will be worse off in Doug Ford, Ontario. His business model is going to crush them, not help them. If Ford really cared about an Ontario that is for the people, he would have worked on a family doctor finder rather than a booze finder, and he would have invested in the public services we all rely on rather than throwing away the very revenues that fund them, end quote.
Yeah, and like I just, when she says that quote, I thought to myself what you just said, like the amount of money he probably poured into creating this that he could have put into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, shocker, another thing that Ford tries to do that backfires on him. And this is all important to remember with the whispers of a potential election coming around sooner as
Mhm.
opposed to later. At this time, nothing has been confirmed. It's just been conversations that have been
Yeah.
heard. And Ford would rather create an interactive map to help people find alcohol as opposed to spending his time and money making a map that would better our healthcare, just like Colleen said.
Yeah, so shameful. It was very interesting that during the strike, a poll by Global News was done, and only about 15% of Ontarians said that they were affected by the strike.
Yeah, and that's like a big number because in
Hmm.
that poll, 90% of the people who did it said that they knew about the strike happening. And part of the poll that I found most interesting is that 49% of the respondents said that they supported OPSEU's goals, including the wage increases and more permanent employment positions.
Yeah, and I also just want to add here as well that prior to the strike, like OPSU, even like the strike happened after Canada Day. So like there was
Yes.
enough notice. People were able to like stack up on their alcohol or other drinks as necessary. It happened after a major holiday in Canada as well. And I
Hmm.
believe like leading up to the strike, they were open like even later as
Yeah,
well.
I don't
So,
remember.
like OPSU, even as a union, kind of did the most they could do to kind of prevent this strike. And even when the strike was going to happen, like their members kind of did a
Hmm.
great job to like mitigate the harm or the
Hmm.
damage to the
Hmm.
public.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's very telling that the general public overall had the backs of the workers here. And it's so important with a strike, especially one that's high profile, such as this one. Um, in an article by Global News again, where they discuss this poll, an associate professor from Masters Labor Studies School says not only the Ford government not have a great reputation with labor because of the higher profile disputes with workers and healthcare, but his policy moves can be really seen as benefiting his buddies instead of Ontarians. So,
Yes.
profits over people.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
that's really all it boils down to. And so we forgot to mention too the associate professor's name is Stephanie, and so Stephanie is quoted in the article saying again, there is a base of support for the union's message here, both in
Hmm.
terms of working conditions that they're trying to fight to improve, and in terms of the role that the LCBO plays in funding public services in the province. Which is true. And
Yeah.
for some reason, I don't know, I didn't even, and I, this is kind of like I should know better, and I have learned, but like I didn't even realize how much the LCBO funding affects public services, and this really opened my eyes to it. So I can only imagine how much it opened other people's eyes too.
Yeah, and I think the ad we talked about the commercial a bit
Hmm.
earlier,
Hmm.
that also opened my eyes, just the messaging around that about the services and the funding. Yeah, they did a really good job using that
Hmm.
ad and using their campaign to kind of drive that messaging home.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, not only did the OPSEU members make history with this strike, but it was also one that was incredibly well supported by the public.
Yeah, so then on July 19th, OPSU and LCBO came to a tentative agreement, and on July 21st, a deal was ratified, and the workers went back to work on July 23rd.
Yeah, and Colleen McLeod is quoted saying, "We went on strike to protect good
Hmm.
jobs and public revenues and to win more permanent jobs with benefits and guaranteed hours. Our members stood strong. They held strong lines. They talked to their communities and they won."
Woo! Yes. Yeah,
Yay!
I'm so happy for them as
Me
well.
too. Oh, yeah.
On OPSU's website, an article announcing the ratified agreement says the deal includes significant improvements from the employer's last offer on July 3rd, the day before the strike started. In this new contract, there is a guarantee of no store closures and a cap on the number of agency stores akin to the private liquor stores. Most importantly, there was a shared commitment to the future in which the LCBO and its revenues will continue to grow with Ontario. In addition to wage, severance, and benefit improvements, workers also achieve a massive win with 1,000 new permanent part
Oh,
time in retail and 60 permanent full time in logistics.
that's amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great
So
first step. Yes.
Absolutely. And so OPSEU workers went on strike and their demands were met and they won and they had public support on their side. And I really think that they showed the public how incompetent Ford is. It's such amazing worker power.
Yes, so we are truly happy for OPSEU members and their bargaining committee, and we hope after exciting 2 weeks and months of negotiating and bargaining that they get some real rest, because we know burnout is a real thing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so I'm just going to like put a little thing here that hopefully they all listen to our episode, Life After the Rally. So that was released back on November 1st, 2021. It's an oldie but a goodie. So if you want to know more
Okay.
about burnout and post strikes and all that kind of stuff, what to do to take care of yourself, it's a good one. So
Yes.
you're going to plug it.
Plug it away. So while this is an excellent recap of the LCBO strike, it is worth driving home the real reason that we should continue to advocate for public services. Throughout the strike, we saw an expedition to expand the sales of alcohol in convenience, groceries, and big box stores. Like, I could elaborate. I have a grocery store next to the building I live in. I'm not going to say the grocery store name, but right after, during the strike, now they sell alcohol. And that was very quick. And so we are seeing that, Ford is still rolling out his plan.
Yeah.
And we see that expanding the marketplace does have some rippling effects. And we might not see it right away. And we might not actually know the full extent of the impacts. It might take years until it truly unravel itself.
Yeah. There's you make like a good point. Like there's it still is unfortunately happening in some places.
Yeah.
Like, I live in a smaller town and there is we have one Avondale. And they're going to be starting to sell alcohol in the near future too. They have a little sign on their door. So
Yeah.
I know, which is also sad because it's not unionized workers, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
whole other thing. So one other thing that comes to mind is the future of access to jobs, particularly for young people.
Yeah.
So while the government continues to implement their commitment to expanding the marketplace, the reality is that you have to be at least 18 to sell alcohol. And young people who may work at grocery stores as their first jobs, they may be limited in what they can do. And employers may be more reluctant to hire youth as cashiers, mainly if they aren't 18 and they can't sell alcohol. So for big box retailers, they might be able to get away with that. But think about all of these small convenience stores, like the one I was just talking about.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, for sure. And another point I want to flag is the potential for an alcohol deficit. So I'll just expand a little bit on this. So in a July 19th CBC article titled Ontario's Alcohol Deficit to Grow with Expanded Sales, expert, the article sheds light on how alcohol-related crimes and health issues cost the government over $7 billion last year, and how alcohol sales only generated 4.2 billion in sales last year. So if you're looking at how much alcohol related crimes and health issues cost the government and how much money we made from alcohol sales, there is just slightly over a $2 billion deficit.
And that article also references a study from the University of Victoria's Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research, which details how alcohol availability will lead to an increased burden on taxpayer dollars in the long run. So Tim Namey, a director at the university, argues that, quote, even though selling our alcohol is good business for alcohol producers and sellers, it's actually a rotten deal for taxpayers in Ontario, end quote. So expanding sales will place a greater financial burden on our public systems.
Yeah, so we'll add a link to the CBC article and the study in our show notes, just for our listeners to get a full grasp about how, the expansion of alcohol into the marketplace is actually creating harm in the long run. So what can be done as a collective, or what can we do as a collective to push for better services and jobs?
Yeah, so for one, we can continue to protest the government. So the Ontario Federation of Labor is organizing a Fed Up with Ford protest, bringing it to the Ford Fest this year. This event will have already happened when this episode airs, but we want to share about it.
Yeah, this is great. Disrupt the event that is strategically planned to make Ford look good. And our listeners may be wondering why the OFL is organizing such a event or a protest. In the press release, OFL President Laura Walton states, quote, after 6 years of Ford government, life in Ontario is harder and more expensive for the working people. It's why we're organizing to win the things that working people in this province need: well-paying jobs, affordable housing, and a clean and healthy planet, end quote.
Yes. And so we're, like we said, recording this episode before. So we would love to hear from our listeners about how the event went and whether Ford decided to show up or not to his own Ford Fest. The results of the strike are a great opportunity to engage with members about issues like decent work, livable income support, affordability, well-funded public services, and most importantly, how we can continue to show solidarity with one another.
Yeah. And, how we keep mentioning that election might be coming around the corner and it might be happening sooner than we think. We encourage our listeners to start these conversations and not wait for the writ to drop. We think it's important that our members understand the issues that affect us and how we can hold the government accountable for their decision making.
And so for all our listeners from CUPE locals here in Ontario, reach out to your local labor councils, CUPE Ontario, and other grassroots organizations, because there is power in numbers and resources. And on that note, I think it's a great time that we start wrapping up today's episode.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So before we close out, Brianna and I wanted to highlight a few things coming up in the CUPE Ontario world. So take it away, Brianna.
Yeah. I will start. So now that we're approaching fall, I can't believe I'm saying those words.
I'm so excited. I'm so sorry.
No, I love fall too.
I'm so excited.
No, I love fall because of sweater weather, and I love wearing sweaters, but just the fact that it's going to get dark earlier within a couple of weeks.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's the only thing.
Serious.
Sorry for the little tangent, but what I wanted to drive home with the fall season coming around the corner is that there is the CACO conference and the HCWCC conferences that are taking place on September 24th, followed by the Injured Workers and Health and Safety Conference on October 21st.
Yes, and I had done a little bit of work before with the Health and Safety and Injured Workers committees for this conference, so I can tell you it's going to be fabulous. And of course, don't forget fall school is coming, so keep visiting the CUPE Ontario website for more information, including on how to register. And if you are not signed up for CUPE Ontario's e-blasts, I encourage you to sign up for those, because you will get you'll get a lot of e-blasts about when you can register for all those events too.
Yeah, and then one more event I would like to share with our listeners. On September 18th, a free Grassy Narrows run is happening in Toronto. It's a great opportunity to walk or run with the Grassy Narrows youth and community members to show them that we are in solidarity with them on their path to achieving Mercury justice and freedom. If you don't live in Toronto, there are buses that are taking people from different parts of the province to Ontario for that event. If your local wants to participate or support their campaign, we'll leave a link with all the details in our show notes.
And so thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into episode 39 of CUPEcast, Weathering a Dry Summer. This podcast was written and researched by us, Brittany and Brianna, and we want to take a moment to thank all of the CUPE Ontario staff involved with this episode. Without them, this podcast wouldn't exist. If you have future podcast ideas, please email us at cupecast@cupe.on.ca. That's CUPECAST@cupe.on.ca. And we also want to thank our friend Mohammed Akbar for being the edit master. This podcast would not sound as great as it does without his talents. And he's going to be editing this and he's going to hear this. And so today, the day that we were recording, is also his birthday. So happy birthday, Mohammed.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, so we record this obviously sooner than when we release it. So he will hear this and he'll laugh at us. But anyway, so today is Mohammed's birthday. So happy birthday, friend.
Yeah. And so before we close out, we want to thank you, all our incredible listeners, for tuning into this episode of CUPEcast. Please continue to look for us anywhere you stream or download podcasts. This includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on the CUPE Ontario website. Please follow and subscribe to the CUPEcast. And if you listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, write a review, leave us a message, let us know what you thought about today's episode, or share a link with your friends or fellow members in your local. Our show notes have tons of information that you can also share with your friends, particularly since the LCBO strike has ended. This would be a great reference if you ever need a little bit of history, a little bit of tips, a little bit of tactics of what you could do in your bargaining. Thank you for listening. Sending solidarity.